guys, welcome back to my channel. The case that I'm going to be looking into today is the case of Daniel Markel. Danielle? No, not Danielle. Daniel Markel. He was commonly known by everyone as Dan, so that might be how I refer to him in this video, by friends and family and everyone else. And this case is a doozy. It was a suggestion by one of you guys. I wish to thank you for that, and obviously if you have any more, please do let me know. Currently in the news, I believe, with trials and things going on. We'll get more into that as we go along. Let's jump into the case. Daniel Eric Markel was born on the 9th of October in 1972. He was born in Canada, in Toronto, to Ruth and Phil. When he was a little boy, he was just such a sweet little guy. And as he got older, he was very intelligent as well. He knew exactly what he wanted to do in life. He studied politics and philosophy. This is not Harry Potter. Philosophy as a Harvard undergraduate. He completed studies at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and earned a master's degree in political theory. And then he went on to receive his JD from Harvard Law School in 2001. So as you imagine, very intelligent, very career-driven, and knowing exactly what he wanted to do. He was also a very religious Jewish man too. Now, what he had a passion for was to become a teacher. His parents did advise him, go into the law, get some sort of oomph behind you, get some money behind you, and then maybe go into teaching. But like I said, he was passionate, he was driven, and teaching is really what he wanted to do. Before that though, he served as a law clerk to Judge Michael Daley Hawkins, and that was in the appeals court. He was associate in a law firm. So something I actually didn't mention in between that, before he took on the teacher's job, he was in the running of like a partnership in his law firm that he worked at. He met a woman who was called Wendy Adelson. And she was said to be a lovely, charismatic woman. They hit it off and would eventually form a relationship. Now, she was also she was a lawyer herself, I believe. Her father, Harvey, was a dentist. Her mother had initially worked as a teacher and then went on to work as a dental practitioner, and she had two brothers too, one of which was called Charlie, and I believe he went into work in the dental practice as well. It was like a family-run practice. Her other brother was called Rob, and they were both older than her. And I think Rob actually became a doctor. She was actually in Miami, Florida at the time, and he was in DC. So obviously, Tallahassee, I think, somewhere like that. They were doing long distance. They were meeting up at weekends, whenever they could, really. And, you know, was just... long distance is hard, but they were enjoying spending time together. And this is where his love for teaching sort of sprouted from. He really wanted to become a teacher. And eventually he did get the job in Tallahassee to work in a university. He would become a law professor there. Wendy also got a teaching job, I believe, and they decided to get married. It was a conventional Jewish wedding, lots of dancing, lots of happiness. Everyone looked, you know, really happy to be there. But there was one problem. Well, at least one issue that it really upset Dan. Like, it was their wedding day, their big day, and this issue really upset him. So Dan was a Jewish man. He wanted the sort of catering to be strictly kosher, but Wendy's parents were the ones that actually hired the caterer, and that wasn't done. So when he turned up to his own wedding and found out that, you know, it would sort of start the rift between him and Wendy's parents, his in-laws. Yeah, that's it. So Wendy went to live with him in Tallahassee, but it wasn't where she was brought up, where all her family and friends was. She basically hated it. She didn't want to live there at all. They ended up having two boys together. He was a loving, doting father, and they absolutely loved their children. But Wendy's love for their marriage was kind of disintegrating. Wendy also felt like she said that he was never abusive towards her, but in the fact that emotionally abusive, because she didn't feel equal to him. She didn't feel this. She was more expected to like stay at home with the kids, and he could focus on his career when that's not what she wanted to do, kind of thing. And also, she really missed Miami. She didn't want to live in Tallahassee. She also did this podcast in which she actually stated that she never loved him, but she married him anyway because most people in marriages don't love each other anyway. I don't really understand that, but there you go. She felt very lonely in their marriage. She said that pretty much as the children came along, that's when their marriage kind of fell apart for her. She also ended up writing a book, and Dan never bothered to read that, which, okay, I get people that don't like sort of fiction or works of fiction and things like that, but I mean, personally, I would at least want my husband or fella or whatever to at least attempt to read it. But that's just my opinion. So obviously that upset her too. And this is when Wendy did decide that she'd had enough and she wanted a divorce. So he was out on a work trip or something like that. And I think she rings him and says, you know, we're basically splitting up and I'm taking the boys, and that's that. He quickly gets on like the first flight home, comes home to an empty house pretty much. She's literally taken, she's gone. His bed's still there with divorce papers on it. And she's taken like half of the furniture and everything. I believe she even took like a diamond ring that was part of Dan's family, not hers, which was, you know, pretty controversial at the time. But yeah, she just took the boys and she went. And then that sparked this big sort of custody battle, of course, because he wanted his kids there. He wanted to see the kids. If they lived in Miami, he couldn't do that, like a co-parenting thing. And so they had this massive sort of custody battle in which was eventually decided that the kids were to stay in Tallahassee, and it was going to be a joint parenting thing so that he could visit his kids. And that basically meant that Wendy was stuck there, even though she really didn't want to be there. Her family were also fuming about this. They wanted her back. They wanted the kids over there. And her mum would sit and write these massive long emails to her saying about how we're gonna do all these things to Dan to make him not want to keep you there, and this, that, and the other, how we want you home. She used a nickname for him, which nobody really knows where it came from, but it was kind of thought to be derogatory. I have no idea what it even means, but yeah, there you go. That's the thought behind it. She even mentioned about getting the children baptized and under Christianity, even though he was a highly religious Jewish man, and how that would really upset him and he wouldn't like it. And just things like that. Very much going over the top with it all kind of thing, in my opinion anyway. Now, the couple did eventually start moving on from each other. You know, Dan started dating somebody and so did Wendy. People have remarked how this gentleman actually looks like Dan. He was called Jeff. But, you know, they were both kind of seemingly moving on with their lives. And that was until 2014. It was the 18th of July, just after 11 o'clock in the morning, when Dan's neighbour heard sort of this smashing sound and then this loud pop. He comes outside to find out what on earth is going on. Sees a sort of greyish, metallic-y, greenish car pulling out of the driveway. A Prius, he thought it was. And speeding off down the road. He goes inside Dan's open garage. His car door was open. There was glass. The window had been smashed. His glasses were on the floor. His phone was on the floor. And he found Dan in his car with a close range gunshot wound to his head. He was still alive at this moment in time, but that wouldn't be the case for long, sadly, because basically his injuries were unsurvivable. So anyway, he rings the police, he tells them everything that's happened. They rush Dan into hospital. Within 24 hours, sadly, he does pass away. Because like I said, it wasn't able to survive such injuries. But now the question was, who on earth had done this to Dan? So of course they get Wendy in. She starts speaking to the police in like an interview, which is recorded, you can find them. And she looks devastated at the fact that Dan has been killed. She doesn't understand who would do this and wants to try and help in any way possible. At some point during an interview, she actually rings her mother, tells her, and when she puts down the phone, she says, oh, she sounded surprised. At least that's good. Because basically she was thinking that maybe her mother had something to do with it, or something along those lines. You know, honestly, this case is just crackers. But The one thing that they do have to go on, they look into it all. They even suspect Jeff at one point because obviously Wendy mentions him and says that Jeff didn't like Dan. And Jeff didn't like Dan because he was dating Wendy. They weren't anymore. They was split up at this point. But when he was dating Wendy, you know, Dan had hurt her. So he didn't like Dan, but he wouldn't go to the point where he would go and kill him for that. He had a airtight alibi, like a concrete alibi. And basically they ruled him out as a suspect. But yeah, they were looking into this, figuring out what on earth has gone wrong, who would even have a motive to try and kill Dan at this point. And then they focus on this Prius, because that is the only information that they really have on it. So they managed to get camera footage of this Prius travelling down, they get some bus footage of this Prius, and eventually, so the colouring of it, there's hundreds of God knows how many of these cars in around the area in Tallahassee at that time. But what they do find is sort of tiny little things, and they really put that out into the public to try and hope that they are caught from it. So, or at least they can get this car for it. One of the tow, you have like a tow ring on the front of your car and you have a cap to cover that. Well, that was missing. So that was one of the aspects that they were focusing on. They have the mirrors on the wing mirrors are both the same colour of the car normally. One on the, as you're looking at a photo from the front, on the left side is black. So obviously it had been replaced at some point and not got the same colour again. And also they had this sort of sticker on the top for toll roads. Now Tallahassee didn't even have any toll roads. And so they were thinking that it might not even be from around here. So they check around everywhere and eventually they managed to trace this car back to a rental place in Miami. So they go to this rental place, which was really, really amazing of them to find anyway. They go down, they try and find out the information from this rental place, and they do. They find out the men, they have a rental agreement of the two men that actually rented that car. Now, the strange thing here is, from what the police can find, they have zero ties to Dan whatsoever. The names on this rental agreement were Luis Riviera and Fredo Garcia, and it was said that they were brothers. Fredo was the brother of Luis, but that wasn't actually the case. They were just friends from a very long time, and they also had gang affiliation. Well, one of them did anyway. So Luis Riviera was actually a member of the Latin Kings, which is a gang sort of in Miami. And the other one wasn't really a gang affiliate, but he had a long list of priors. This did allow the police to access these gentlemen's phone records, and they basically tracked these phone records, tracked where they went all the way. And on the 16th of July in 2014, it showed that the two men were heading up north on the I-75. It was a 7-hour trip to Tallahassee. Then on the morning of Friday the 18th, the cell phone towers put them right outside Dan's fitness center. Now, basically, they followed Dan's cameras. I actually really just forgot to mention this completely, which is just ridiculous because it's an important factor. When they found this car, they tracked Dan. They basically tracked him to a fitness center before he went home. And on this, they found this car following him home. So that was where they found it from, and they followed it and eventually found all the information on it. Dan had pulled into his garage and he was on the phone to a friend. He actually mentioned to a friend that somebody was in his driveway, and the friend heard these muffles, and that was when they heard the shot kind of thing. And this person obviously had murdered Dan. But these guys were now being tracked to the fitness area in the Prius. They were being then tracked to Dan's house. And obviously he was shot just after 11. Now, not long after this, the Prius was caught on a bus dash cam camera, heading in the opposite direction, like basically heading back to Miami kind of thing. The two men were also caught making one more stop on the way on some cameras, and they were driving through this ATM and they got some money out. But on it, you can see the men very clearly, and then the cell phone sort of drives them all the way back to Miami, where they drop off the car again and then they go about their business. So of course they arrested these guys on the suspicion of the murder of Dan, but they had no idea as to what the motive was, because they had no ties to Dan whatsoever. They didn't even live in Tallahassee. How on earth did these people know Dan? Well, this is where the case gets crazy, because it turns out that some of Wendy's family may actually have been involved in Dan's murder. So, in between sort of the Adelson family, the hired killers was a woman called Catherine Mamboaga. Now, as it actually turned out, she was one of the men's who did this hit, ex-girlfriend, and was currently then dating Charlie Adelson, Wendy's brother. So Catherine was convicted of obviously orchestrating this crime. She was like the middle woman in it all. She got a life sentence plus 60 years for it. And now Charlie is currently up for trial for his role in it, because they honestly believe that he was the one who sort of orchestrated it all via her, basically. And there's also potential that his parents are involved, because they hated Dan too. Obviously, this is just, you know, it's not particularly hearsay. I believe the police believe it. And also potentially Wendy's involvement in it too. You know, maybe she was part of this conspiracy as well. They genuinely do believe that. She hasn't been charged with anything whatsoever yet. But right now, Charlie is in, you know, in court and he is at trial. So this is all still unfolding. And it's currently in the news. And I just can't wait to see what happens, because genuinely watching those videos of Wendy react, I don't know whether I'm just like, everyone's faking it kind of thing, but to me, it kind of seemed a little bit fake. She does look very upset, don't get me wrong, and I might be completely wrong. She might have nothing to do with this, but I don't know. That's just the vibes that I got when I watched the interviews, personally. Go watch them for yourself, believe, and obviously you'll make your own opinions of that. But yeah, it could be a family conspiracy thing to try and get rid of Dan so that she could move back to Miami and have her kids with her. Honestly, absolutely crazy. I believe Dan was like 46 years old when he was murdered. And it just fully breaks my heart. But this is still ongoing and I'm going to keep myself updated with it. Obviously, if anything major happens, I will update you guys too. But yeah, that is the end of the case. If you guys have enjoyed this video, give me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel for similar content. Anyway, that's all I have today on the case of Dan Markel. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye.